Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, October 24th, and on the show today, we are going to do an addendum to yesterday's biochar segment. We're going to talk about how to talk about science, and we're going to get a question on composting in a garbage can. So let's do it. All right, I hope everyone had a good Wednesday. I did this show. I cleaned up some stuff around the farm, which is the best feeling because that stuff has been staring at me for months. And then I did the soccer coaching thing, which is always fun. We pseudo-scrimmaged another team by putting together a skills challenge where the kids competed in passing, dribbling, shooting, and etc., which I think the kids enjoyed. The season is almost over, and my philosophy is basically just make sure they leave the fall season having a blast so that they want to come back in the spring. This is also how I feel about farming. Make sure to end on a relatively fun high note so you want to keep engaging with this absurd business when the sunlight returns. And for me, cleaning up and listening to podcasts does the trick nicely. Anyway, although I usually save my feedback episode for Friday, which I still intend to do because it alliterates better, I did want to add one addendum to yesterday's show with the biochar trials. Commenters were quick to point out that I neglected to mention anything about the biochar being activated, inoculated, and or charged, which is true. That is a bit of an oversight on my end, and I appreciate my commenters for chiming in. So in case you missed the episode, I am trialing biochar this winter with garlic. Oh, and speaking of missing the episode, I should say that yes, although this is a daily show, the old episodes, and by old, I guess I mean episodes from a few weeks ago, are still totally, or at least almost totally relevant and hopefully worth a listen to or a watch. That's the advantage of acting like a sports or news show without being an actual sports or news show. The bulk of what I say or talk about is relevant for significantly longer than a game or a news event, or at least I hope it is. Anyway, in yesterday's episode, I described some trials I was doing, and I gave a little primer on biochar, but I did not mention in that primer that the biochar I am using is inoculated, or that biochar should be inoculated and or charged before applying it to soil. I will do more of a thorough breakdown of these processes in the future if you want, but if you are using biochar, indeed, you want to make sure it is inoculated and or charged unless you plan to do that process yourself, which is a thing. People can do it themselves. Inoculated simply means that it has been treated with microbes of some form in some way, which is how the FOOP biochar that I'm using for my trials describes their product. Charged means that it has also, although perhaps solely, been treated in some ways with nutrients. The idea here is that one, biochar can inoculate your soil and act more like an amendment if it has been charged and or inoculated. But two, if you put raw biochar into your soil, it has the potential to absorb nutrients and lock them up. So effectively, it could inhibit your plant growth. It's a bit like working raw wood chips into your soil, which is not a great idea. The biochar, like raw wood chips, will lock up your soil nutrients for a time and limit plant growth. Now, activated in a scientific sense is often actually a somewhat different thing than how most farmers use it. In agriculture, the term activated is a bit of an umbrella term used to describe a biochar that has been inoculated and or charged. However, scientists and manufacturers of biochar for things like air and water filtration, and it has some uses and some potential in the energy industry and batteries, construction, and many other areas, honestly. Anyway, other folks who use or make biochar for industrial applications seem to use the term activated largely to mean treated with chemicals or steam or other gases to increase the pore volume and surface area of the biochar. So the biochar you make in your backyard is not necessarily activated in that sense, even if you inoculated it or soaked it in some nutrients or something. But sometimes farmers will refer to charged or inoculated biochar as activated, which I think is fine because activated is kind of a perfect word for it, not going to lie. I'm a big fan of words like that. I love good words, and I think activated is one of them. One of my other favorite words/terms is sudden death in sports. Like whoever scores the last goal wins, and that's called sudden death, which is absolutely genius. Anyway, back to the biochar. It seems like there are some times that scientists use the term activated to also mean something somewhat similar to what farmers mean. Scientists and researchers can feel free to chime in there and let me know if I'm off base on that. Anyhow, this is not the biochar episode, nor the episode where I steal words from scientists. We will do that another day because I want to more richly explore different options for charging and inoculating biochar and look at what the studies say are the best ways to accomplish those things. Also, the way in which biochar is made, including the types of feedstocks, that is the raw materials used to make biochar, can have substantial effects on the end product, and some feedstocks may be preferred more than others for specific uses. There's also the potential to have contaminated biochar. So lots of stuff to talk about there. So I don't recommend you just running out, getting some charcoal and throwing it on your soil. It's more complicated than that. Last thing on this topic, though, is perhaps part of why I did not say anything about inoculation or charging to begin with. It's that subconsciously, I think I assumed at this point the vast majority of biochar on the market was going to already be treated with nutrients or microbes or both. In other words, I think I assumed raw biochar would actually be somewhat difficult to find, but it turns out, because I asked questions, I was wrong. It was one of the first things that came up when I searched for bulk biochar was raw biochar. Now, it does come up as raw biochar and has all the requisite warnings about nutrient tie-up, but it is possible to inadvertently buy some uninoculated, uncharged biochar that could tie up nutrients in your soil. So I guess if biochar is an amendment you are interested in, just be aware that the raw version is still out there. For some of you, you may want to do your own inoculation at home anyway, with your own microbes, your own compost. So it is good to know that you do also have that option, which is cool. But again, more on all of this in another show or shows. So make sure you are subscribed or following along. All right, I didn't mean to tie up the entire first segment with raw biochar. Pun possibly intended, but it happens. Anyway, next up, we will discuss composting in a garbage can. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out.
If you, the listener, want to support our work, you can do so at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come from, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Today's question comes from Patreon member Jody, who writes, "Backyard Gardener here. Great podcast." Thanks, Jody. "I have yet more questions about composting. I throw my food/garden scraps into a plastic garbage can with the small holes at the bottom. Interestingly, each summer it has swarms of black soldier fly larva casings, which I have read from a Purdue University research group are great for my garden. My question is it undesirable to have an unmixed, anaerobic compost that is loved by the black soldier flies? If yes, why? And if yes, is there anything I can do to amend it?" Thanks, Jody. Great questions. And so I guess my first question for you would be, are you sure it's anaerobic? I mean, you said unmixed, so maybe you just mean it's unturned. Unturned compost is not the worst thing in the world, especially on a small scale like that, depending on what you're adding to the pile. Anaerobic means that the pile is low in oxygen and in that way probably smells like raw manure, and your disgust response would be going bonkers. If that's not happening, then in terms of an anaerobic issues, you probably don't have any, except for maybe a couple spots in the very bottom in any pockets where moisture cannot escape through a hole. Turning provides oxygen, and that can also keep a pile evenly heated, which will destroy weed seeds and plant pathogens. Perhaps you can occasionally secure the lid with a ratchet strap or something similar and push the can on its side, then roll it a few times to achieve some aeration, some mixing. It's probably not entirely necessary. The one thing I would perhaps be more concerned with than the aerobic versus anaerobic issues is the hot composting in a plastic container and what chemicals from the plastic may be leaching into the compost. I'm not saying it's a big deal. It's hard to say. Depends on the plastic. but there might be some light contamination there. If you could follow the same system in a wooden box or container of some sort, it might be better all around. Now, if you are smelling anaerobic funkiness, then a couple things can help. One, make sure you are properly covering any compost additions with wood chips. They are chunky, which helps with the aeration element, and they are carbonaceous, which helps with covering the smell. You could also consider adding several more holes to the bottom or cutting the bottom off entirely for better drainage. That may also be convenient for when you want to empty it. If you're, for instance, like hand watering it, pull back if the compost feels mucky or smells funky. You should be able to squeeze some water out of it, but it should not feel like muck, and it shouldn't just like pour out when you squeeze it. Also, just maybe to enhance it a little bit, worms might love a setup like that. So you could consider moving that finished material over to a worm bin or adding worms into that garbage can and really maximizing the quality once it has gone through the thermophilic, the hot stage. You don't want to add them into the heat. They may not love that. And by that, I mean, they'll probably just die. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, Jody. And I really appreciate your support and question. Patreon members, keep them coming over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, let's talk about unburying the great growing information that scientists inadvertently bury. Be right back.
Hey everyone, this is Clara Coleman, and I just wanted to pop in here real quick and say that if you're enjoying this show, you may also enjoy my own show, the Winter Growers Podcast. I interview growers from all over the world about how they produce year-round, especially through the winter months. We talk about the infrastructure, the mental and physical challenges, the tips and tricks, and I even include a thought-provoking lightning round of questions at the end of each conversation. You can subscribe to the Winter Growers Podcast wherever you get podcasts, or subscribe to the No-Till Growers Network on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for letting me jump in, and I look forward to seeing you there. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
So a couple weeks back, I got this new edition of Growing for Market magazine, the volume 33, number 8, September 2024, this one here, which had an article in it titled Tillage vs. Mulch in a Permanent Bed Organic Vegetable Experiment. That caught my attention, but perhaps not for the obvious reasons. What it is that some researchers from Cornell, Mayer, Rangarajan, and Caldwell, which I hope I said all of those right, along with a handful of students, conducted a permanent bed organic vegetable trial from 2015 to 2018, part of what will ultimately be an 8-year study, it sounds like. And this article was sharing their findings on a few different no-till mulch treatments versus tillage. But it isn't those findings that I want to talk about. Sorry, I might actually do that tomorrow instead, since I have only so much time to produce these every day. Instead, what I thought was great about this particular article was that it existed at all. Here was a dense research paper presented directly to the people it might help in completely comprehensible language. Amazing. Now, if you've followed me for any amount of time, you know how annoyed I get knowing that most of the best growing information in the world, stuff that could actually help farmers, the planet, the public, everybody, is locked up deep in the scientific literature, protected by dense jargon. Information that just gets continuously passed back and forth between researchers and rarely ever trickles down to the folks who could use it, the growers. But if we don't celebrate when the opposite happens, like with this article written in plain language for farmers, then we are failing the solution. So I want to take a second to just say how awesome this is to see this article written out in straightforward language in a trade publication. It is multiple pages long with great details and insightful summaries plus pictures, and I think farmers can get a whole lot from it, and it is very interesting. Again, it is a no-till trial that I will talk about what the findings actually were tomorrow, but I really want to encourage this sort of collaboration between farmer publications / educators and researchers and applaud the fire out of it. I really loved seeing this article simplified and put into a publication where farmers will actually see it. Now, if I can offer a light criticism for future adaptations of research articles, there is one thing that could help improve this particular article or any particular article a lot. Researchers who I know this because I've talked to them and they are amazing, but they have to appreciate that jargon isn't the only thing that makes research papers hard to read. Acronyms are a significant culprit, and in this article, they do still lean pretty heavily on acronyms. Meaning instead of saying rye mulch, they use RM throughout the article, or instead of conventional tillage, they refer throughout the paper to it as CT. I get it. And I know there is often a word count thing to overcome from publishers, but to keep track of 7 different acronyms, like it is in this paper, there are 7, is a bit of an unfair request. Now, I'm not saying farmers can't keep up with all those acronyms. I'm saying they create an unnecessary obstacle in both reading and then accurately following and understanding the research. If it's a word count issue, I don't know, maybe combine the words. Hashtag them. I don't care. Hashtag rye mulch. I'm good with that. Just look for other ways to reduce the word count. As any journalist will tell you, staying confined to a word count is part of the job. They crunch and clarify sentences, which ultimately makes the article more readable and precise. What they don't generally do is use acronyms to reduce the word count, and I hope researchers will shy away from that in the future, that habit, both in papers like this and also just in research papers. As a grower, it's just not super helpful to have so many acronyms to keep track of. But that's honestly my only criticism. Seeing this article in Growing for Market was really cool, and I'm not sure how often editor Andrew Mefford and the team over there have done that, but I do read this publication most months and don't recall seeing another article like that. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I would love to see more research papers laymanized like this for farmers, and I am generally heartened to see more plain language summaries of research papers ahead of the abstracts in general. I love going to a website to read a paper and it has the plain language summary at the top above the abstract. That's awesome. More of that, please. Science communication is a huge topic of conversation, but for me, I love seeing researchers making the effort. So cheers to you all. Really appreciate it. Cheers to Growing for Market for publishing it. Tell your friends. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up there. Huge thank you to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the folks at No-Till Growers for their support. Also, huge thanks to you all. I've received so many messages and comments from people loving this podcast, and that's very cool to hear because I have no idea. I'm just kind of throwing this thing out into the ether and just seeing what happens. Naturally, there are people on YouTube who prefer the old format, and I get that, and we will still do some of those videos from time to time, but there is a whole slew of reasons I'm not focusing on them anymore that maybe I will get into at some point. The gist of it is just that I can cover a lot more technical and nuanced things in this format, science communication, for instance, than I can in a classic Farmer Jesse video. Those videos are built for very generic how-to instructions, and I've basically done all those how-tos that I can come up with, or frankly, that would make a video people would actually click on. And with the rise in short-form video, no long-form videos are getting the views they used to, so revenue is simply not there to justify doing that much work for a video that the revenue doesn't cover it. Of course, again, those videos are not gone. Remember that I always kind of quit doing videos over the winter because the sunlight goes away. Like it's like 7 o'clock and it's barely light outside. And so basically I have no time to do them. And maybe I'll give a more detailed breakdown of the changes that led to Growers Daily beyond just what I laid out there another time. But for the moment, hopefully you can glean some good info and entertainment from this show. Now, let's shout out the increasing number of wonderful people who support this work through patreon.com/no-till-growers, where if you sign up this month, or at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to, where are we at? Joseph Person, Sydney Noctegal. Is that like nightingale? Noctegal? Is that like, I don't know, German for nightingale? Or did I just make that up? And Alexis Tan, great name. Great names from all of you. I love it. I love reading these names. It's so amazing. Thank you to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can, even if it's just like sharing on your favorite social media platform how much you love the show. Love it. Appreciate it. You all rock. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for listening/watching.